Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Filmstudy. This is Ken McCusick. Joining me today to talk about the 2020 Ravens cornerback situation is Dev Panchwagh, a longtime friend of the show. Dev, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. And I appreciate you having me on. We're in the off season already, so that's the only I guess thing here where we're hoping that well, I guess everybody's in the off season, but hoping that it would have been a little bit better circumstances of the discussion. But always enjoy talking to you, regardless.
Yeah, lots of fun. I don't really want to rehash the 5 stages of grief, or I might have to go through them again. So anyway, wish it hadn't happened the way it did, and wish it hadn't ended the way it did, but here we are. Let's talk about the cornerbacks a little bit, because it's an interesting position for the Ravens. Obviously, they're built back to front. They spend most of their defensive money, or a high portion of their defensive money, at cornerback in particular.
Yeah, and this is a position that you could argue that this is a position they value the most. Just like you said, resources, investments, draft, free agency, you name it. They've put a lot into this position. And I think, going back a couple years ago, there's a couple factors I could see. One is they've had injuries that have derailed them at cornerback. And then the second thing is, just in terms of foresight, being able to match up against teams that pass the football, that's where the league is headed. They've, I think, astutely identified that we need, corners to play in heavier coverage packages or volume-based coverage packages, right? So they've identified that quickly, and I think, but their frontline cornerbacks, that's as good of a group as any. And then even extending it further, they're loaded and deep. 3 to 4. So
yeah, unusual for a team to spend a lot of money on their fourth cornerback. The Ravens have Jimmy Smith there. They re-signed him again, which is frankly maybe a little bit of a surprise given the number of bodies they have at cornerback right now, and some cuts that are going to have to take place at the end of camp if everybody stays healthy.
It's just interesting even getting ready to talk to you. I mean, if you look at the lists, they're going to be cutting some really good ball players that could easily transform or transition into being a viable slot corner at the minimum for other teams. And that's just kind of how things have gone. But they are willing to take a lot of swings at the position, I think, to have a really good third, fourth cornerback, and that's what they value. And Jimmy's a good example of a guy that they've even taken a step further. Ideally, he would have played a different role for them, but because they needed him to, he was able to slide in and be essentially a starting cornerback that could take on a lot of snaps.
We'll talk about a little bit about Jimmy and the safety position, but I got to tell you, I saw that coming a mile away in terms of he's much more valuable to this team as a fourth corner than as a third safety, and I'm kind of glad they got him out of that safety spot and away from some of the injuries that potentially could have called. Now, he never played a traditional dime back role, where he was, in the middle of the field. He was always back end in a dime where Clark would move up or even Elliott would move up on some plays. But still, I think there's more injury risk and more tackling responsibility at safety, which was probably made it a risky proposition at best.
Yeah, I agree. It was a bit of an experiment, right? And we're going to talk about it in depth. There's some thoughts I had about how they use him, and I liked it. But yeah, you're risking, you are risking his health, and he's a guy that's already not durable.
Yeah. All right. Well, start wherever you want. Who would you like to start talking about?
If we're on this flow, let's go with Jimmy, because I find him to be such a fascinating player. I'm sure you do as well, just because we look at utilization, right? So I liked and I loved actually the idea of maybe not traditional safety, right? But just a chess piece, a guy that when you need him to match up against the tight end, like a Kelsey, which I think is kind of like would have been like the ideal for Jimmy, or his role-based matchup against tight ends, pass-catching tight ends, big receivers, but perhaps like third, fourth receivers that you just can't really ideally match up with in normal circumstances. But that's what I liked going into the season with Jimmy. And then, I think he played really well. I know he's, I think you assessed him really well. I know outside entities like Pro Football Focus assessed him really well, et cetera. But, I think I'm glad they brought him back, and I'm glad he's back in the fold, and hoping that with Tavon Young healthy, if he is healthy, then Jimmy can kind of continue to rotate and they can monitor his snaps. That's my initial take on him. I just think he's such a good ball player. He's only 31.
So 42% of snaps this year. And frankly, I don't think it would have been reasonable to expect him to play at that much in a year like this, or maybe better stated, I don't think the Ravens planned for him to play that much originally at the beginning of the season. They might have planned for him to play 25% of snaps as a dime safety, maybe a few extras corner. Maybe you get to 42% that way. But, Jimmy, with a batch of injuries, made it through, still played 42% of the snaps, and was very good when he was on the field. I think he's still very much a natural outside right cornerback. A guy who likes to use the boundary exceptionally well, likes to push that defender, move him physically, get him towards the sideline, get him to run out of room along that sideline a lot of times, also force the quarterback to make a judgment that is an overthrow.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's really his strength. He pins the receiver to the sideline so well. His technique, his length, everything, right? He's a prototypical right side like cornerback, and I think plays to the strength because they have Humphrey on the other side. We'll see what happens next year. Of course, again, projecting it forward, whether that's more of a rotation for him. But one thing and one game I wanted to point to and wanted to get your thoughts on was because I wrote about it, was the Titans game during the regular season, and that was the one where it jumped out to me where the Titans didn't have a third receiver. So eventually in that game, they had Jimmy covering Anthony Furster, who was killing them on third down. So that's one where the Titans have Jonnu Smith as well, but if you have to shift him and move him on a receiver like that, or maybe a step below, but I think the Colts as well, like they like to use their tight ends like that, but something like that where you have a hybrid guy, I wouldn't have a problem with him moving with that player, and I think could handle himself really well.
Yeah, well, obviously, one of the problems with a split tight end in today's offense is every team seems to have at least one guy they want to split, that they don't want to play in line. And your typical slot corners are too small for that guy. They represent a size mismatch. Jimmy Smith has enough change of direction skills to cover a tight end. I don't think he's really ideal for a true slot pony wide receiver. I wouldn't want him covering Devin Duvernay, if he were in the slot.
Yeah,
but I think he's perfect for a tight end who he matches up well with in terms of both a speed and size basis, and it was a good use of him. When they could use him in there. The Ravens, very unusual as a team in that they are not built with a lot of slot corners, and the Ravens of old accumulated a lot of extra slot corners, and they didn't have the kind of length to play outside. Now they're all aircraft carriers, and they have to move Humphrey to the inside to play slot, which is really out of position for him.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. I mean, that's why they were in a bit of a bind in the Buffalo game. They played Humphrey there, and it worked out, but and I think part of that's Beasley. Cole Beasley wasn't healthy, but when you're in that situation again, they forecast things next season. I got to think they'll look at that closely and say we don't want to be in that type of situation again. Tavon being, not durable. Do we have to flex one of our guys that is just kind of a mismatch inside, and then what are we going to do with these other slot, like Jarvis Landry, you're going to face twice a year. The Steelers guys, I mean, depending on what happens with Juju, but even then, you have plenty of potential problems in the slot.
Right. There are a handful of teams, and unfortunately Pittsburgh is one of them, who play 10 personnel, Buffalo is another, and force the other team to use four corners. And they're looking for two mismatches there primarily. One is if you have a guy on the out, if you have anybody who's just a mismatch because the levels of corner are A, B, and D, you've got in terms of your relative value, they're looking for that. But they're also looking for, are you too short on either outside or slot corners? And in the case of the Pittsburgh game, Terrell Bonds got picked on a fair amount. And so he's a guy, that deserves some mention. I don't think he played terribly or anything overall, but he had a pass interference call. And as they were going those nickel and dime little drives in the second half to get down the field, it was a lot of receptions to his guy that was doing the trick. 3.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then the smart quarterbacks, the veteran quarterbacks will take advantage of that. They're not going to worry too much about, getting the ball to a certain receiver. They're just going to take whatever they can get at that point. And I thought those are 2 good examples. Was a Big Ben exploiting it. So, and then you had some exploits in the Buffalo game, I thought, but they did a good job of keeping that to the minimum.
Anything else about Humphrey before we move on?
Not a whole lot to say. I mean, if I was to nitpick, I'd say he played slightly less better than he did the year before. I think there was a couple of games where his old draft profile or draft, I think, the kind of the knock on him was that he doesn't do as well in downfield coverage at times, tracking the football against bigger, more physical receivers. Some of that showed up. I mean, obviously the most obvious you can point to is A.J. Brown, but I think it's nitpicking. He did have some games where he wasn't as sharp, but that's going to happen to any elite corner. And for my money, he's still top 5 in the league, and it's not even really worth debating, or there's not much to debate.
Right. I don't think there's too much to debate either, but I will point out ball skills come in 2 forms. Obviously, it would be better if he had more ball tracking ability to play the ball in the air, but he's absolutely at the top of the entire league in terms of punching the ball free after it gets there. Yep. Whether that means usually a PD is what I'm talking about, but he had 8 forced fumbles this year in terms of getting the football. Baseball bat-like arms in terms of attacking the ball, hands, and forearms of those receivers.
And it's contagious. Somehow I know he's worked with the other guys on it too. So worked with the other guys, I should say. But that's the cool part, is that it's not just him. It's filtered to everyone else, kind of like the Ray Lewis effect, right? So yeah. It's been he's so valuable for them.
Yeah. So I do. Well, we'll talk about the next guy here, Marcus Peters, because I think this is a good segue. But Humphrey, definitely a batterer, a puncher of the football. Peters, he had some good success with forced fumbles this year. He's a prior. He tries to pry the ball loose, which is something I associate with Ed Reed as being a guy who would try and find the end of the football and kind of flip it out that way, as opposed to, try to punch the football and get as hard an impact as he can on it to get it loose.
Yeah, that's a good observation. That's a good way of seeing it. I think I've noticed he is kind of always acutely aware of where the ball is. And then, he's not, it's not necessarily like a tactical, like punch striking it, right. Or the way Humphrey does, but it's okay. He's the ultimate, playmaker for them right now. And I know, and this is something I'd be interested to get your take on. I know there was some chatter about him not playing as good of a season. I mean, yeah, I could see he got picked on some more. It's going to happen when you have 2 corners that are that good. One of them is going to get picked on more. My observation with him is I saw some a little bit like he was a little bit more shaky and off coverage at times, like just kind of he would drive on the ball and then, naturally, I think offenses study the film and they said, all right, we're going to use some double moves on him. You saw that in the Titans game in the regular season, for example, with Corey Davis. So there's some of that. And I think his overall off coverage at times was a little bit too slow or late. And so there's some of that. And I think, but he also made plays, and he's just was all around still stellar from my book.
Yeah, I mean, I think you take chances with who he is, and you realize you're rolling dice a lot of the time when he's at cornerback, as opposed to just tossing a blanket over that receiver. He makes very good, judicious gambles. They're high value gambles. Obviously, the play in the postseason is the best example in terms of being in the right place at the right time. But when he's undercutting a route, and he had 2 undercut attempts versus Kansas City, and they both failed in week 3. The second one was a touchdown to Hardman, which was a bad guess on Tyreek Hill, and it's going to happen sometimes. You notice his body language. He's realized he's made the wrong move, and his hands are motionless at his side, and he kind of turns off the field almost like a robot and goes up. But I really love that kind of risk taking. I think it has high value. And I think defenses in general are just kind of coming around to the notion of how much risk is really required to stop, for example, 4-down football.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. When you look at the way these other teams are constructed, like Kansas City is probably the one that stands out the most, where they're emphasizing turnovers, sacks, high percentage plays on defense. They don't care if you're gaining yards, if you're giving up plays necessarily. It's just over the course of a game, can we get like 2 or 3 big plays on defense? So if you look at it from that perspective, he would fit in really well. And I think he fits in well here in Baltimore, of course, as well. And I think they do value what he is. I think that's probably what, from a front office and a coaching staff standpoint, the marriage was really well presented, I think.
Yeah, he's a good match for Wink's scheme-based pass rush as well, because they're really focused on getting fast pressures off of scheme. And when that happens, that accentuates Peter's ability to make a good guess against the quarterback and more importantly, not get necessarily burned when he makes the wrong guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I know they got even smarter and smarter with some of the coverages at the end of the season. So with a guy like that, you have so many advantages as a coach. And you can trust that 9 times out of 10, even with some of those calculated gambles he takes, that he's still going to be in the right position.
Peter's 86% of the snaps this year, which is very good injury-free, relatively year. I forget if he had COVID or he was involved in that or not, or if the secondary largely was safe from that. But he was injured at the end of the year, missed a game or 2. The next guy, really, as far as I know, he was healthy the whole year, but he had, no, that's not true. He was out for a while, but he finally got a little bit more playing time this year. Is Anthony Averitt, who's 4th on the team in terms of percentage of cornerback snaps at 31.6%. Not what the Ravens would wanted in terms of being that. They probably projected him as their 5th corner behind Tavon, but I thought Averitt really stepped forward this year in terms of his level of play.
Yeah, I know you're a big Averitt guy, and I know that I appreciated the fact that you kind of debunked some of this negativity around him for whatever reason. I don't know what that is, but I think he played well too. And you can't underscore the fact that guys like this just have to be, they're basically jumping levels. I mean, you're talking about the expectation of a 4th or 5th corner that jumps into a 3rd corner spot and just has to jump in immediately because guys are going down. So he did that. And I know that, coming in when they drafted him, there was a little bit of optimism, right, that this could be a starting cornerback pretty quickly. He had that type of talent, he had that type of upside. It's just that they're so loaded at corner that he hasn't had really a chance. And he's also, I think, like you said, is been inconsistent with his injuries. Just overall, consistency has been one of the things. I think this year, though, this is the best he's played, and it seems like the light bulb has gone off. And it'll be really interesting to see where he fits in for next year because of Tavon being back, because he's another guy that I can't really foresee him being able to play in the slot if they need him to.
No, it's not really his natural thing.
Yeah, so then he's another rotational outside corner, and it's a good guy to have, I think, because if you look at Jimmy Smith and you're like, he's probably going to miss 1 or 2 games a year, you're just going to chalk it up that way, then, okay, we have Averitt, we have good depth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Averitt is very central to their plans, and we can talk a little bit about this. But contract-wise, the Ravens have a lot of stacking they have to deal with, a lot of contract stacking. And what I mean by that is the 2018 draft had incredibly 9 guys who are starting level in the NFL right now. Zach Seidler, obviously, is the first guy to get a second contract. It's fascinating of the big 9, and he's on another team, of course. Kenny Young is now playing regularly again, though I don't think the Ravens regret the trade in any way, shape, or form. I'm missing somebody else. Who's the 3rd guy who's already gone? Hayden Hurst is at Atlanta and playing very well.
Yep.
But they still have 3 guys they're going to have to sign for enormous money, and 3 other guys that have just completed year 3 and are, in my mind, are candidates to be signed. And that includes Anthony Averitt. And I think he'd be a very good choice to make a 2 or 3 year small money commitment to. So what I'm talking about, he's a 4th, 5th cornerback right now. If you're Anthony Averitt, would you sign for 3 years for $5 million total right now, or would you be trying to get a big contract after one more year of part-time play, say?
Yeah, you have to be realistic if you're Anthony Averitt. I mean, what are the odds of that happening? I think what versus you stay on, and if this was the pitch to him, if Eric DaCosta had talks to him or his agent to say, look, I mean, realistically, you've got Jimmy Smith, you've got Marcus Peters is locked and loaded, but his contract situation is not a given. I mean, there's and Tavon Young, right? So you got three guys almost there that at some point he could elevate above and play and start with Marlon Humphrey, which was kind of I think they talked about that as like a possibility, right? So it's very, I agree. Like, I think he's valuable in multiple ways, and I can definitely see him this season coming up, even, getting some really valuable snaps as he did this season.
Yeah, I'd actually be surprised if it didn't happen, given the names you've mentioned there. And what you were stating, it's almost like you're making the pitch his agent would make to him and say, "Hold on, just wait. You're going to get playing time this year somehow."
Yeah, I don't think Eric DaCosta would say, "Yeah, well, Peters is on a." Kind of shaky contract. I think, but yeah, to your point, the agent could really present that case, and then DaCosta could say, like, there's a lot of opportunity here, I think, in a nutshell. So I think that's a win-win possibility, especially, again, and I'm not 100% off the top of my head. You might know, but I think Tavon Young's contract is actually coming to a closing, right? So.
No, it has one low-value year here, and then has one more year at the original salary. So he essentially is playing for his final year this year, but he had his money guaranteed at a reduced salary level this year.
Okay. Yeah. So, it's not. I mean, basically, there is any possibility that they could move on. It's not going to happen now, but
no, not this year. But they could move on from Marcus Peters. He's not 100% safe given the COVID cap situation right now. And I don't honestly believe it will happen, but I think it could happen.
Yeah, it's one of those, they always have those surprise cuts. So he's one of the guys I could see that happening with. And again, it gets back to how much do they believe in Averitt and Averitt's ability to start. I think that's a huge question because of the guys in front of him.
Another guy who's on this list, and maybe we're going to do a little bit of jumping here to do is Devontae Harris was re-signed recently, and I didn't see that coming. I didn't think that was a sure thing by any means, but that tells me additionally that the Ravens may well have plans to part ways with Peters if they want to have that kind of an insurance policy there, because otherwise, I mean, I don't know how much money they gave Harris on a guaranteed basis for this, but I'm sure there has to be some, or he wouldn't have even bothered. He would have signed somewhere else. Yeah,
I think he would have had a market, not necessarily up front, but later on. But he's someone that is unique because he strikes me as like as a prototypical, like he might have just not been the right fit in Denver altogether. System, whatever, the Ravens have that in their own right, like Kenny Young we just brought up, right? So you have guys that just don't fit, period. So I think he's talented enough of a player, and I think he showed himself well in spots last year. I think when he had to jump in. So athletically, I think he can play. I think he can play in this type of coverage scheme where you're asked to do a lot of man-to-man coverage. So I like
play in the slot maybe a little bit.
And and I think he can do some slot as well. He's got good athleticism. He's got good change of direction. So he's intriguing. I think as a prospect, as a talent, I think they have something to work with. And I can't, like you said, I didn't necessarily think twice about it, but I'm glad that they did bring him back and they have him in the fold.
Yeah. So just a little bit bigger stable. They have Travon Williams, I assume, will not be back. I haven't heard anything yet. 38 years old this last year, so he'll be 39 this coming year with the normal math involved. And he wasn't great or anything. They used him pretty effectively to blitz off the slot. And it really underscored just how much the Ravens need another slot corner, that he's in there playing some real significant snaps down the stretch.
Yeah, I guess I might have been a little bit more wide-eyed about him when they got him because of the history. He's been one of the best slot corners in the league for a long time. Like you said, really kind of had the makeup of the type of corners that they have done well here, which is, he can blitz, he can play physical, they can move him around. He's got good. He's a smart player, good football IQ, but I just don't think. I think he's pretty much at the end of his rope, in terms of his physical ability at this point. I'd be surprised if they brought him back. But yeah, the type of corner that he represents, that's where maybe they'll investigate someone like him in the draft, or we're going to talk about that coming up. But I like the type of player he is, and it's just the exact guy that they brought in. They had to do it out of desperation, but he did. I think he served his purpose. It wasn't a total disaster, right? But I think unfortunately it didn't go as well as I had kind of thought it might go.
Yeah, that's probably fair. It just it certainly wasn't his best season. I mean, he was a hell of a player for Green Bay for a long time, and that's it was a step back, but it is what it is. And I also had his age wrong by one. I'm sorry, he's still not yet 38, but he will turn 38 before the season. So that's where we are. Terrell Bonds, we mentioned a little bit earlier, got a little bit of playing time, and actually more than you would have thought. Terrell Bonds ended up playing, in terms of snaps for the year, 7.2% of the Ravens' defensive snaps, which is higher than I really recalled, because he was only in there in packages where they typically would have to go to a fourth cornerback.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess they had to go to that well quite a bit. I agree with you initially when you said that he wasn't as bad as it seems. I think he got picked on. I can't remember which game it was off the top of my head where he was picked on. Like oh yeah, that's the game you brought up earlier, right? So I don't know if there was another one, or I guess that's the one. And maybe I just blocked it out of my memory how often he got picked on in that game. But that stuff happens. We've seen, like we talked about earlier, again, like you have a quarterback that understands, like, okay, I got the mismatch I want. This guy's not playing well. His confidence might be going down in the tank. So I'm just going to keep it going, which is what happened. But to his credit, I think he did play reasonably well, and he's a guy that I think is a perfect end of rotation player. I don't know if he's going to get caught in the numbers game though, but definitely worthwhile to let him duke it out with the other guys.
Yeah, and he fits that slot profile more. Unfortunately, they started the clock running. I'm not sure it really matters as much in the case of a player like him. He'd been on the practice squad, I guess, a couple of years. Maybe this was his second. Maybe it was even his third. I think it was his second. But he now has the clock running, so the option value is draining out of the hourglass. But on the other hand, I'm not sure he's the kind of player you really worry about 3 years of option value from.
No, I don't think so either. He was a break glass in case of emergency player.
Yes.
And that's probably what they would view him as, again, if it comes down to it. And I don't think if you lose him, he's going to be scooped up. He might, but again, he's a prototypical, again, end of the line guy, and that's what he did this year.
And one guy I left off the list, and I apologize for that, it's in the production, is Khalil Dorsey was really ahead of him on the depth chart from the practice squad in this weird year where you have 15 practice squad slots and you have a whole bunch of ability to build in depth there. Nobody knows what the other team has in terms of practice squad because there was no preseason to look at tape there. So there's less pilferage, certainly, as a percentage of total practice squad spots, or probably even in by number this year. And Khalil Dorsey came in, played 4 snaps, and allowed a 39-yard pass in that Washington game.
There you go. So that's not much to go off of. I think if I remember correctly, prospect-wise and physically, I think he's got some skills. So again, he fits to me in that same bucket with Bonds, and that he could be someone worth kind of keeping an eye on, but I don't foresee or expect too much out of him, especially with Young coming. Like, again, you have to think Young coming back and some of these guys coming back. I don't think he'll necessarily be on the team, but you never know. Yeah,
I would think practice squad, if anything, and he'd be there. And I should know this, but I don't remember if the practice squad is going back to 8 this year, or if it's 9 with international players, or what it might be, but or 10 even. But the Ravens won't have as much depth on that practice squad, I don't believe, this season that they've had in the past. So they're going to have to trim and keep one man depth across a number of positions.
Yep.
Nate Brooks came in there, wore number 17 on defense. Always weird to see that, kind of a wide receiver number, if anything. But played briefly in that Cincinnati game. I didn't think he was terrible by any stretch. Probably, did the job reasonably well in that. Maybe a little surprised we didn't see more of him. He's a guy who's, I don't know how long he's been kicking around the practice squad, but he's the North Texas guy.
Yeah, I know there was quite a bit of anticipation with him, just based on that, right? Because he had built up like that reputation, and you were just kind of waiting for him to play. And then, like you said, surprised that he didn't play as much. Maybe it just came down to a playbook thing, and again, like he just wasn't as ready as some of these other guys were ready. I think he's got some pretty interesting physical skills. I don't know if he can, wear multiple hats or not in this defense, but that's kind of what I took out of it. Like before he played, that he could potentially do that, and he could be kind of an all-around defensive back for them.
I think a lot of it comes down to whether or not he's too big to play the slot. And at 6 feet 192, he might be. So that begs a question of, do you need to find another guy, or can you specialize him on the inside covering tight ends that are split, or what can you do exactly? If you can do that, then the new use is when teams go to 12 personnel, you can put on a nickel, and the Ravens in the old days would have gone to big nickel in most of those situations. So they'd have put a third safety on the field during the Pease era, and even some during the Martindale era. But now they have the ability to put a big third corner on the field against 12 personnel, line him up against the split tight end as another option there.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's a nice option to have, because that's where the game is headed. That's because we just talked about it earlier. Like, these tight ends are just so advanced. They're receivers, but they're too big for that slot corner. So that's a great, I think, solution, is to have a cornerback big enough and probably could still be physical enough. You might be asking for too much in red zone situations, but if you do it, based on down and distance, I think, and have certain packages prepared, I think it can work really nicely. That's where the Ravens do, and Wink and that staff does such a good job, I think, of just kind of identifying specialty players, and and it kind of goes back to the roots of Rex Ryan, right? Like he had the specialty players that could come in and give you some value just on a few snaps.
Yeah, it's Ravens. For people who watch the Ravens, and maybe you watch football and you're not as attuned to the defense as a lot of people are to the skill positions on offense, the substitution required on defense in the NFL and is large. The substitution required on the Ravens defense is unbelievably complex. So they run a lot of different packages, and they can substitute specifically at corner for not just down and distance, but for the opposing personnel. And for people who are kind of new to football, the defense substitutes second. So the hockey fans will know that the home team gets to put their team on the ice second after a stoppage of play where you have a face-off. Well, it's similar in football, that the offense has to make their personnel changes and make them visible. And if they do it late, the umpire will step in, umpire referee, one of the two, will step in over the football, stop the offense from snapping the ball, allowing the defense to make changes. So typically things like the no huddle offense have to be run without personnel changes.
Yeah, exactly. So then I think the way the Ravens have always valued having the depth that they've had, and guys that can wear different hats, play multiple roles, that's where they're at an advantage, because you can substitute, and they take advantage of that pretty well.
Yeah, done a great job with that. They've included their cornerbacks in their blitz packages a fair amount, much more than in previous years. And in fact, they set the record by having 5 different defensive backs register a sack in one game. Was it Philadelphia, Washington, whichever it was? I think it was Philadelphia.
I think it was Philadelphia. Yeah, that was special. That was incredible. Yeah. I remember that game because Elliott was so prolific. So yeah, I think that was the game. they all got in.
Well, one guy I don't think we mentioned yet is Travon Young. We got two still to go. So Travon Young, we haven't really hit on other than to mention him in a lot of other spots and with the injury. What would be a win this year for you out of Travon Young?
Oh, that's a really good question, actually. I don't know how you quantify it. I mean, let me try. I'd say maybe like 12 games. He starts, he plays in the playoffs. You hope you get in the playoffs. Big impact. I'll take impact at the end of the year from him. Then, if he's not necessarily, somebody you can count on all the way. It's not as if he's been a guy that's been nicked and bruised and he misses a few games, though. He either misses the season or he doesn't. So I think what you had in 2018 from him, I'd take that. Like, that would be a good.
Oh, of course.
It was phenomenal. And then he played and made big plays. So I know he's like on a player basis in terms of what he can do. I don't have any doubt. It's his ability to stay on the field. But that's why it's interesting, Ken, because I was thinking about this before I joined. I wrote a piece, something to the effect of like 7 reasons to be optimistic for next year. And he was one of the reasons I had on that list. And I got called out because they're like, well, this guy never stays healthy. So we can't, I mean, if you get, any games out of him, it's a net positive, but it can flip things so dramatically to me.
Oh yeah.
Like if he does play, because you're talking about an impact, and his core position, you're talking about impact to the other positions outside. So it's massive. And I just hope that it works out.
Yeah. I mean, if just as you go through the dominoes here, if Travon can play in the slot, he's not necessarily going to be one of the best slot corners in the league. I think I really need to see after 2 years off where he is again after these injuries. Did they have any long-term impact on his speed? Are the joints rusty at all? I mean, is he able to remember what he knew in terms of the dance steps of the position to immediately get back to that position? I hope so, but I'm not 100% sure that'll be true. If he does, then that position is probably improved over having Humphrey play there. But Humphrey moving back to the outside will be demonstrably better in terms of what he does. I mean, all of his skills are boundary corner skills. Baseball bat arms, where do you do best with those? You do best when you're able to use that physicality by the boundary and knock the ball loose on the outside after it gets there. So I love him on the outside a lot more. And even if it meant they'd have to rotate through 3 guys with Peters, him, and Smith, each maybe taking some time off every game as they did in 2018, I think that'd be a terrific thing.
Yeah, and so I mean that's actually a good frame of reference is 2018. If they can get back to that, and I think the upside is even bigger because of Peters. They didn't have Peters, so you're talking about that type of rotation and that type of balance. But then you have a little bit of a better player, or quite a bit of better player in Peters
for Carr.
Yeah,
is the exchange you make. Yeah.
Yeah. So if they can, again, I know it's a lot of hope for a guy that just can't get out of his own way in terms of the injury bug. But again, the flip side is if he does, watch out. Because, it's funny, and I'll just wrap on this, and I'm not expecting it, but maybe I should stop myself. But you look at when the media talks about the Ravens, right? They talk about this defense. It's never mentioned at all, or it wasn't mentioned one time this season that they were missing him, and he is their slot corner, which is fine. But if you think about it, again, they played the entire season without a slot cornerback in a lot of these games facing teams that were pretty, I would say had, in some of the cases, some of these teams had some of the best in the game, right? So It's remarkable how well they held up.
Yeah, it hurt them a lot. Versus Kansas City, they were going to lose that game anyway. Mahomes had one of the best games I've ever seen at beating the blitz that game. But the game that they probably would have won is the Pittsburgh game at home. I think that if they had Travon for that game, that result gets flipped. And it's Travon instead of Bonds playing on the inside as a fourth corner there.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah, again, you give or take, they would have had some of these losses anyway, but and the Buffalo game was so stressful for me. I was just thinking about how are they going to deal with Beasley, and they somehow figured it out. I mean, give credit to Marlon, but it's no small feat what he accomplished. I don't care if Beasley was gimpy or not. And to have to redo that again or face the prospect of it is very it's tough to consider that, I think.
How shocked would you be if the Ravens used a high draft pick, and I'm going to say a 1 or a 2, to draft a corner in this year?
Well, it wouldn't shock me. I think shock is not a term I'll use because they value the position. We know they invest heavily in it, and we know that just if they see like a guy that falls to them, and I don't remember who was it. It wasn't Asante Samuel Jr., but there was another corner I saw in one mock, and it was like, you have to take him if he's there. Mm-hmm. I can't remember who off the top of my head, but yeah. It wouldn't shock me. It would surprise me. I would be a second rounder. I think is probably fair game. First rounder would really, surprise me. It would really surprise me. I wouldn't say shock. But
they have a lot of this team has a lot of competing needs, and obviously I think the two big ones that are kind of understated on the defensive side of the ball, where they need, by the way, to get out of some expensive contracts and move that money to offense. Yeah. But the two big ones that are not mentioned are defensive line. They have got to get younger on the defensive line. So even if they have 6 picks, 7 picks, 8 picks, whatever it ends up being after they do some trading down, I think we're going to see 2 go to the defensive line this year again. And then the other position is cornerback, where Humphrey they've committed to long term, so he's done, but they haven't committed to Peters yet. It's not a done deal. They don't really know exactly what they have with Tavon yet, so I think that there's a reasonable possibility. Plus, they're behind Tavon. They have so little in the slot. I could easily see them drafting an understudy to him anyway. So whether that's in the second round or the fourth round or the fifth round is another question.
Oh, I agree. I see it that way as well. I know, because of the fact that they only have so many picks and they have so many resources, and so safety is also possible consideration in the defensive backfield. So then it's just going to come down to, can they also find a guy that could be, because the slot, that's why the slot is so unique. It's so valued, because if you can find a guy that can play slot, but then also double up and play outside some, or maybe even, kind of rotate a little bit at safety, or play kind of like, or maybe it goes the other way. If you can find a guy like that too, that would be, I think, a good, 2-for-1, 3-for-1 deal. Right. But I think that's another possibility too.
We didn't talk about Amon Marshall. Probably ought to hit on him too, but that's the other way the Ravens could do it is get a hybrid special teams / corner guy. Yep. And we've talked about this a little bit on the other shows, but I just want to bring this up with you. But the Ravens model for special teams has been, find a guy who can give you something on one side of the ball. It's got to be something. Albert McClellan, Anthony Levine are the prototypes for providing something that's significant on defense, but then also being outstanding special teams players. It's not enough to just be Chris Moore and be a great special teams player. You have to provide something else along with that on one side of the ball. So whether that's at slot, corner, safety, wherever it is, that's where they'd be looking, I think, to get another core special teamers. I think Christian Welch, because of that, I don't think his spot is long for this team, given that he's exclusively a special teams player.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I didn't think about that all the way. I mean, I remember thinking about, they've had some of the best special teams players who are just devoted to that for the most part, and you would think. But even a guy like Brendan Ian-Badejo played linebacker, and he had to actually, and he ended up having a pretty significant role, I think, in coverage. So as a cover linebacker, Chris Moore is basically more or less an anomaly because he doesn't do anything else. But I'm with you. I think they may look at it that way first. If they can get someone who can really, these special teams is always looked at for their drafts no matter what. But if it's a high end guy, on top of that, I think Corey Graham is another one that evolved into a pretty important slot corner for them. And I don't think anybody really thought much of it because of his special teams value. So I could see that unfolding, and that would be fine for me too. Like if they drafted someone who can give them a really good value for both, and maybe in the third, fourth round.
You can get them cheaper than that, honestly. At safety, the Ravens' longtime strategy was always a 6th round or lower. They never went higher than that. But if you look at the Ravens, safeties, Ralph Staten was a 7. Harris, who's one of the great ones of all time, was a free agent they picked up fairly late in his career. But then they had Anthony Mitchell, who was, I believe, undrafted. Chad Williams was a 6. Jerome Sapp was a 7. Haruki Nakamura was a 6. Zibikowski played a little bit in really dime packages and he was a 3. So they tried to go higher. But that's what I want this year. I want that safety, return the Ravens to the dime, because I don't think it worked out with Chris Board as the the proxy safety.
Mm-hmm.
And get that guy fairly cheaply in the draft. But it's certainly a place where the Ravens are short, and they may draft a higher round pick to draft a new deep free safety ball hawk, but they really need to get a dime back. I had hoped Stone was that guy, but it obviously didn't work out. They exposed him and then lost him.
Yeah, I think they will get that player. I think it's going to happen because, to your point, the value that it would bring to their dime package, and I think I can't. Yeah, I mean they've gone back and forth with having the linebacker in that role, but it's just it's tough to be able to compete against Kansas City, Buffalo. If those are the teams you're gunning for, I don't see it. I don't see that, like, this structure being the best way to approach those teams. I just don't, because they're going to put out. I mean, the Bills at 5th receiver, they're at the 5th receiver, 4th, easily they're 4 receivers deep now. That's going to change a bit with free agency, but I'm just, again, I think those teams aren't going to go away from that being their structure to attack the defenses.
Yeah, that's right. And you end up, you're playing a lot of zone on 3rd down anyway, particularly on 3rd and fairly long. And when you're in that position, Chris Board is absolutely the wrong guy. If it was a 3rd and short, I feel better about it because of his ability to play downhill on the passing game. Cover a running back, get to that spot, do whatnot. But I really want a safety in there who can affect the quarterback's passing lanes more when it's 3rd and medium or long, and you're playing him in a short middle zone, and maybe he's like Levine, where he's showing an A-gap blitz at the line of scrimmage and he drops to the short middle zone. Anyway, we're supposed to talk about corners here. Apologize for taking us off base a little bit on that, but boy, I want to see a return to the dime.
Yeah, one last point on that. I'll just say this is, you're 100% right. It's flooding those inside zones. That's why the safety is a better. I mean, if you look at the Chiefs, what they did against the Bills in terms of flooding all the inside zones with 3-4 safeties even. So they didn't really even care about. I mean, you care about the deep ball, of course, but the way that teams are getting the ball out and just throwing the ball quick, I mean, that's really what you want to negate, I think. So yeah, that's what I would also look at as a guy that can handle both responsibilities. And anyway, I think I concur with you.
All right. Loving the idea of that. So, Dev, tell us a little about what you're doing right now. First of all, your Twitter handle is?
My Twitter handle, @DevPanchwagh. So I'm pretty active, and yeah, I mean, that's one way to get in touch with me. I also am, writing for Russell Street Report, and working on an interesting project as we speak, and kind of taking a deeper dive into the coaching hires that the Ravens have made on offense with Williams and T. Martin. So just kind of looking at how are these. There's like this whole perception, Ken, about, I think, from the fan base that let's just sign Allen Robinson or like overhaul the entire receiving core. I don't necessarily agree with that school of thought. I don't think the Ravens do either. I think the Ravens think they have guys in-house they've drafted, developed, or they haven't fully developed them, but they've invested prime picks on these guys. You're not going to just discard them. I think the coaches that they hired are really exciting, and I just get into a little bit more depth here of how they could potentially have the twofold kind of impact of, can they change the perception maybe from the outside joining the Ravens, and then also can they work with the guys they have in-house and improve them. So I kind of talk about that in this piece, and that's going to come out for Russell Street Report pretty soon. So people can look out for that.
Tell me when that comes out, I'd love to have you on the show to discuss it. That'd be a lot of fun to go through 15, 20, 30 minutes, but that'd be a great thing. Dev, always appreciate having you on here. Always great to talk football with you. You can hear just from the timbre of our voice how excited we get about having a good football conversation with each other. This is one of my favorite guests, certainly. And thanks for coming on again, Dev.
Oh, always appreciate it. Thanks so much, Ken.
All right. Looking ahead here, we've got a lot of other positional reviews coming up. There's 8 more to come. Want to also talk to people about film study shorts. If you have an idea, three bullet points to me is usually the best way, by email at filmstudy21@verizon.net or by Twitter at filmstudyravens. Just tell me what you'd like to talk about, and I'll try and help you get there. And we can come up with a way to discuss this. 15 to 20-minute, highly focused topic is the best. Thanks again for listening, folks. Thanks, Dev, again for being on.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.